You know, there's something deeply wrong with how we've been taught to deal with suffering. Every self-help guru, every therapist, every well-meaning friend tells you the same thing. Minimize pain, maximize pleasure, avoid suffering at all costs. But what if I told you that this very approach, this desperate attempt to escape suffering, is precisely what's keeping you trapped in it? Have you ever noticed how the more you try to avoid pain, the more it seems to find you? How every attempt to rewrite your past or control your future only amplifies your anxiety? You're not alone in this. In fact, you're experiencing something that a radical German philosopher discovered over 140 years ago, a truth so dangerous to conventional wisdom that society has been trying to bury it ever since. And if you've made it this far in life feeling like something fundamental is missing from the happiness equation, you're absolutely right. This might be the most important 20 minutes you spend today, because what I'm about to share completely inverts everything you've been programmed to believe about suffering, happiness, and what it means to live a meaningful life. The philosopher I'm talking about didn't just theorize about this, he lived it, through years of chronic illness, professional rejection, and crushing loneliness. Yet he called his discovery the formula for human greatness. What he found has been systematically misunderstood, watered down, or outright suppressed because it threatens the very foundations of how modern society operates. It challenges the victim mentality, the therapy industrial complex, and the entire self-help movement. In 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche was walking through the Swiss Alps, suffering from debilitating migraines that would leave him bedridden for days. He had just been rejected by the woman he loved. His books were commercial failures, and his health was deteriorating rapidly. Yet it was in this moment of profound suffering that he experienced what he would later call his greatest philosophical revelation. He didn't discover how to eliminate suffering. He discovered something far more profound: how to transform your entire relationship with it. He called it Amor Fati, love of fate, and claimed it was the only honest response to existence in a godless universe. Let me tell you what I mean, because this isn't just abstract philosophy, this is about your life, right now, today. By the end of this video, you'll understand why every moment of suffering you've experienced hasn't been a mistake to be corrected, but a necessary component of your potential greatness. You'll see why trying to rewrite your past is not just futile, but actively destructive. But here's what nobody tells you. Accepting this truth is simultaneously the most liberating and the most terrifying thing you can do. In 1889, Nietzsche was found in the streets of Turin, Italy, having suffered a complete mental breakdown. He had thrown his arms around a horse being whipped by its owner, weeping uncontrollably. This man, who would influence every major thinker of the 20th century, spent his final decade in mental darkness. But 7 years before this collapse, while walking near Sils Maria in Switzerland, Nietzsche experienced what he called the most profound thought of his life. You see, Nietzsche wasn't living in our world of endless distractions and quick fixes. He was living in the immediate aftermath of God's death, not literal death, but the collapse of religious certainty that had guided Western civilization for nearly 2 millennia. The comforting belief that suffering had divine purpose, that pain was part of God's plan, had evaporated. Science had explained away the mysteries, Darwin had reduced humans to clever apes, and the universe suddenly seemed cold, purposeless, mechanical. Most people responded to this crisis in one of two ways. Either they desperately clung to dying religious beliefs, or they fell into nihilistic despair. But Nietzsche saw a third path, one that required a complete transformation of how we understand suffering itself. He realized that in a universe without inherent meaning, without a cosmic father figure ensuring justice, we had only two choices: descend into resentment and self-pity, or learn to love our fate exactly as it is. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Nietzsche wasn't advocating for passive acceptance or resignation. He despised what he saw as the slave mentality of simply enduring suffering. Instead, he was proposing something far more radical, actively embracing and affirming every single moment of your existence, including and especially the painful ones. He wrote, I want to learn more and more, to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. This same pattern exists today, except we've replaced religious consolation with an even more insidious delusion. We've been taught that suffering is a technical problem to be solved. Depression, take a pill. Anxiety, download a meditation app. Traumatic childhood, years of therapy to heal and move past it. Society operates on a kind of agreement that pain is always bad, pleasure is always good, and the goal of life is to maximize one over the other. Think about how you've been programmed to view your own struggles. When something painful happens, what's your immediate response? You probably think, this shouldn't be happening, this is wrong, I need to fix this, escape this, or at least minimize the damage. We're like fish swimming in water, completely unaware that this constant resistance to reality is precisely what amplifies our suffering. But what if I told you that this entire framework, this pleasure-seeking, pain-avoiding operating system we're running on is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human greatness actually works? What if the very experiences you're trying to escape or heal from are the exact experiences required for you to become who you're meant to be? Nietzsche observed that all great human beings, every artist, philosopher, leader, or creator who had genuinely impacted the world, had one thing in common: they had suffered profoundly. But more importantly, they had transformed their relationship to that suffering. They didn't overcome it, or heal from it, in the way we understand those terms. They integrated it so completely that they could no longer imagine themselves without it. The first thing Nietzsche discovered was that suffering and happiness aren't opposites, they're dance partners in the same cosmic performance. Every moment of joy you've ever experienced is inextricably linked to moments of pain through an invisible chain of causation that stretches back to your birth and beyond. You cannot have one without the other. And trying to separate them is like trying to have a wave without an ocean. You see, reality is like a vast spider's web, where every thread connects to every other thread. Touch one strand, and the entire web vibrates. Your greatest joy, maybe it was falling in love, achieving a dream, or experiencing a moment of profound beauty. That joy exists only because of a specific sequence of events, many of them painful, that preceded it. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine your life as a river flowing from birth to death.
Every experience, every decision, every moment of suffering has carved the riverbed, determining exactly where the water flows. Now, you might look at a particular bend in the river, maybe a traumatic experience, a failure, a loss, and wish it hadn't happened. But here's what you're not seeing. Remove that bend, and the river flows somewhere else entirely. That moment of transcendent happiness you experienced downstream, it never happens. That person you met because you were in a specific place at a specific time, shaped by specific experiences, you never meet them. Nietzsche understood that we cannot cherry-pick reality. You cannot say, I want this moment of happiness, but not the suffering that made it possible. They are one phenomenon, not two. When you truly grasp this, something profound shifts. You stop seeing your painful experiences as mistakes or detours. You start seeing them as necessary chapters in the only story that could have produced the person reading these words right now. This isn't metaphorical or poetic. It's the actual structure of reality. Every scientist will tell you about causation, but they won't tell you the philosophical implications. If you genuinely love anything about your life, you must love everything that led to it. This is the beginning of what Nietzsche called Amor Fati. Nietzsche himself embodied this principle in the most extreme way imaginable. At age 24, he became the youngest person ever to hold a chair at the University of Basel, a prodigy destined for academic greatness. Then his health collapsed. Blinding migraines, vomiting, near blindness. He had to resign his position at 35, becoming a wandering invalid, moving from boarding house to boarding house, seeking climates that might ease his pain. Any normal person would have been consumed by bitterness. Here was a brilliant mind trapped in a failing body, but Nietzsche made a different choice. He wrote, "I have often asked myself whether I am not more heavily obligated to the hardest years of my life than to any others." He realized that his illness had freed him from academic conventions, forced him into solitude where his most radical ideas could develop, and given him an intimate understanding of suffering that no healthy philosopher could possess. The books he wrote during his years of illness, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals revolutionized Western philosophy. Would these works exist if Nietzsche had remained a comfortable professor? Impossible. The suffering wasn't an obstacle to his greatness. It was the prerequisite. He later wrote about his illness. "It was only then that I learned what life is. I had my illness to thank for my philosophy." This shows up in your life in ways you've probably never recognized. Think about your deepest friendships. Aren't they often with people who've shared difficult experiences with you? Your most profound insights, didn't they come after periods of confusion or pain? Your greatest strengths, aren't they usually your healed wounds? If you've ever felt like an outsider, different from others, carrying wounds that seem too heavy, you're experiencing exactly what Nietzsche described. That feeling of being broken? It's not a bug in your programming, it's a feature. It's what gives you depth, perspective, and the potential for genuine wisdom. But here's where most people get stuck. They acknowledge that past suffering led to present growth, but they still resist current and future suffering. They say, "Okay, I learned from that experience, but surely I don't need more pain." This is like saying, "I understand that fire was necessary to cook my food yesterday, but surely today food should cook itself." The process doesn't stop. Growth requires friction, always. But that's not the most profound part. Understanding that suffering and joy are interconnected is just the entrance to the rabbit hole. What Nietzsche discovered next will completely shatter your conception of personal identity and free will. Because once you truly grasp Amor Fati, you realize something terrifying and liberating. You are not who you think you are, and the story you tell yourself about your life is the very thing keeping you trapped in suffering. Now, you might be thinking, "This sounds like I'm supposed to be a masochist, enjoying pain for its own sake." But that's exactly wrong. Nietzsche isn't telling you to seek suffering or wallow in it. He's revealing something far more radical. Your relationship to suffering is a choice, and that choice determines whether you live as a victim or as a creator of meaning. Here's the paradox that breaks most people's minds. Your greatest wounds are simultaneously your greatest gifts, but only if you stop trying to heal them in the conventional sense. Think of a broken vase repaired with golden lacquer in the Japanese art of kintsugi. The cracks become the most beautiful part. But this only works if you stop seeing the cracks as mistakes. Moses couldn't speak properly. He had a speech impediment that should have disqualified him from leadership. Yet he became the greatest prophet in Hebrew scripture, precisely because his weakness forced him to rely on something beyond eloquent words. Van Gogh's mental illness tormented him, but also gave him a unique perception that revolutionized art. Lincoln's chronic depression gave him the gravity and depth to lead a nation through its darkest hour. You see the pattern? These aren't stories of people overcoming their weaknesses. These are stories of people whose weaknesses became the cornerstone of their strength. But, and this is crucial, only because they stopped trying to be normal, stopped trying to fix themselves according to society's standards. Nietzsche calls this becoming who you are, not who you wish you were, not who society tells you to be, but embracing the specific, unique configuration of strengths and weaknesses that make you irreplaceable. Your damage isn't holding you back from greatness. Your refusal to integrate your damage is. The light doesn't enter through your strengths. It enters through the cracks. But most people spend their lives desperately trying to seal those cracks, to appear whole, to fit in. They don't realize they're sealing out the very light that could transform them. Here's what happens when you begin practicing Amor Fati, and I want you to pay attention to your body's response as I describe this, because you'll feel it even now. First, there's a moment of vertigo, like standing at the edge of a cliff. Your mind rebels. Every protective mechanism you've built screams, no, because accepting your fate completely means accepting that person who hurt you, that opportunity you lost, that part of yourself you've been trying to amputate. Then something shifts. It starts as a tiny loosening in your chest, like a fist that's been clenched for years, finally beginning to open. You realize how much energy you've been spending on resistance, on maintaining the fiction that things should have been different. It's exhausting, isn't it? That constant mental litigation against reality, that courtroom in your head where you're perpetually arguing your case against the universe. When you drop the case, when you finally say, yes, this too, all of it, something extraordinary happens. The energy you were using for resistance becomes available for creation.
You stop being a victim pleading your case and become an artist working with the materials you've been given. The same experiences that were crushing you become the raw materials for your masterpiece. But here's what they don't tell you. This isn't a one-time realization. It's a practice, a daily choice. Every morning, you wake up and reality asks you the same question. Will you accept me as I am? And every morning, you have to find the courage to say yes again. The danger is that you'll misunderstand this as passive resignation. Whatever happens, happens. That's not Amor Fati, that's nihilistic laziness. True Amor Fati is active, passionate, creative. It says, given that this is my reality, how can I transform it into something magnificent? If you don't grasp this distinction, you'll use Nietzsche's philosophy as an excuse for inaction. You'll say, well, if I'm supposed to love my fate, I guess I'll just accept this mediocre life. No, loving your fate means loving yourself enough to demand greatness from yourself, precisely because of, not in spite of, your limitations and wounds. The other danger is spiritual bypassing, using philosophical concepts to avoid genuine feeling. Amor Fati doesn't mean suppressing grief, anger, or pain. It means feeling them fully while simultaneously affirming their necessity in the grand composition of your life. You can weep at a funeral and still love fate. You can fight against injustice and still love fate. The opposite of Amor Fati isn't feeling difficult emotions. It's the resentful belief that these emotions indicate something has gone wrong with reality. There are 5 distinct stages people go through when truly integrating Amor Fati, and I'm going to walk you through each one. Pay attention to which stage you're in, because most people get stuck at stage 3, thinking they've arrived when they're actually only halfway there. Each stage represents a deeper acceptance, a more profound transformation of your relationship to existence. And yes, you will resist some of these stages with every fiber of your being. That's how you know you're approaching something real. Stage 1. The dawning recognition. This is where you are right now if this video is resonating. You intellectually understand that fighting reality is futile, but you haven't yet felt it in your bones. You see the logic. If everything is causally connected, then wishing for a different past is like wishing you were someone else entirely, but your heart still rebels. You find yourself thinking, yes, but surely that one thing could have been different. This stage is marked by a war between your mind and your emotions. Stage 2. The great grief. When the intellectual understanding finally penetrates your heart, you don't feel liberated, you feel devastated. Because accepting fate means accepting every loss as necessary, every goodbye as perfect, every door that closed as exactly right. You grieve not just for what was, but for the fantasy of what could have been. This is where most people quit, thinking they're doing it wrong. But this grief is the signature of real transformation happening. Stage 3. The false summit. After the grief comes a kind of numb acceptance. Fine, you say. I accept my fate, whatever. But this isn't amor fati. This is depression masquerading as wisdom. You've stopped fighting reality, but you haven't started loving it. Many people remain here for years, thinking they're enlightened when they're actually just exhausted. The telltale sign? A subtle feeling of superiority over those still fighting reality, mixed with a deep, unacknowledged emptiness. Stage 4. The terrifying. Yes, real amor fati arrives like lightning. Suddenly, you don't just accept your fate, you want it, all of it, exactly as it was and is. This isn't a thought but a full-body experience. You feel the tragedy and comedy of existence simultaneously. You understand that changing anything would unravel everything. This yes includes your mistakes, your humiliations, your losses, not despite the pain they caused but because of it. Stage 5. The creative explosion. When you truly love your fate, you become fate itself, an active force shaping reality. You stop seeing yourself as separate from the universe, subjected to its whims. You realize you are the universe experiencing itself subjectively. Your wounds become your tools, your limitations become your style, your past becomes the foundation for unprecedented creation. This isn't acceptance. It's exuberant participation in the cosmic dance. When you understand all these stages together, you see why Nietzsche called Amor Fati his formula for greatness. It's not about what happens to you, it's about your ability to transform what happens into fuel for becoming. Every great human being has made this transition from victim of fate to lover of fate. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." Notice he doesn't say accepts or tolerates. He says wants. This wanting isn't masochistic. It's the recognition that you and your fate are one phenomenon, not two. Rejecting your fate is rejecting yourself. But here's the crucial insight most people miss. You can't skip stages. You can't jump straight to the creative explosion without going through the grief, the false acceptance, the terrifying yes. Each stage is necessary preparation for the next. Try to bypass any stage, and you'll end up with a philosophical concept instead of a lived transformation. And that's exactly what happens to most people who encounter these ideas. They collect them like butterflies pinned to a board, beautiful but dead. This isn't just about your personal transformation. It's about the entire trajectory of human consciousness. We live in a society built on the opposite of Amor Fati. Our entire economic system depends on you believing you're incomplete, that happiness lies in the next purchase, the next achievement, the next relationship. The therapy industry thrives on the premise that you're broken and need fixing. Social media algorithms feed on your resentment and victimhood, amplifying every story of injustice and trauma. Think about how we talk about success and failure, happiness and suffering. We've created a culture where admitting you love your fate, all of it, including the difficult parts, is seen as delusional or privileged. We're more comfortable with someone saying, "I'm a survivor of trauma," than "my trauma was the making of me." We've made victimhood into an identity and wonder why rates of anxiety and depression keep climbing. But underneath this cultural programming, something is shifting. More and more people are waking up to the futility of the happiness chase. They're realizing that trying to optimize their lives for maximum pleasure and minimum pain leads not to fulfillment but to a kind of existential emptiness. They sense what Nietzsche knew, that a life without suffering isn't a human life at all. It's the fantasy of a child who hasn't yet learned how reality works. We stand at a crossroads as a species. We can continue down the path of trying to eliminate suffering through technology, medication, and distraction, or we can mature into a species that understands suffering as the price of consciousness, the raw material of meaning, the very thing that makes joy possible. People will resist this truth because it threatens everything they've built their identity around. If you truly accept that your suffering was necessary, not a mistake, then what happens to the story you've been telling about yourself? What happens to the blame you've carefully assigned, the resentments you've nursed, the fantasy of the life you should have had? It's not easy to see why we cling so desperately to our victim stories. They give us a kind of dark comfort. They explain why we're not where we want to be. They provide a ready excuse for our failures. Most importantly, they allow us to avoid the terrifying responsibility of creating meaning in a meaningless universe. When someone fully embraces Amor Fati, they become dangerous to the social order. They can't be manipulated through fear or desire. They can't be sold the promise of future happiness. They can't be controlled through shame or guilt. They've found a source of strength that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy has been so consistently misunderstood and misrepresented. It's not because it's intellectually difficult, it's because it's existentially threatening. A society of people practicing Amor Fati would look nothing like our current world. The entire structure would have to transform, but you don't have to wait for society to change. In fact, waiting for external change is the opposite of Amor Fati. The transformation happens one person at a time, one moment at a time, one yes at a time. When one person truly awakens to Amor Fati, something remarkable happens in their sphere of influence. They become like a tuning fork struck in a room full of instruments. Their frequency causes sympathetic vibrations in others, but not in the way you might expect. They don't preach or try to convert others. Instead, they simply live with a different quality of presence. Where others see problems, they see raw material. Where others feel victimized, they feel curious. Where others contract in fear, they expand in acceptance. This isn't positivity or optimism. It's something far more powerful, alignment with reality itself. I've observed this phenomenon repeatedly. Someone embraces their fate completely, and suddenly the people around them start questioning their own resistance patterns. It's as if the person practicing Amor Fati creates a field of permission around them. Permission to stop pretending things should be different. Permission to love what is. This creates a ripple effect. Each person who awakens to this truth makes it easier for others to do the same. Not through evangelism, but through example. They prove that it's possible to love fate without being passive, to accept reality without being resigned, to embrace suffering without being masochistic. Imagine what happens when this reaches critical mass, when enough people stop wasting energy on resistance and redirect it toward creation. When victim consciousness gives way to creator consciousness. When humans stop trying to escape the human condition and start fulfilling it. This isn't utopian fantasy. It's the logical outcome of a species that matures into full acceptance of reality. So how do you actually work with this knowledge without letting it destroy you or turn you into a philosophical zombie? Here are 7 practical steps for integrating Amor Fati while remaining fully human and engaged with life. Step 1. Trust your perception when it conflicts with consensus reality. When you feel that pull toward accepting something others say you should resist, that's your wisdom speaking. Don't let social pressure override your instinct for integration. The crowd is almost always wrong about what leads to genuine fulfillment. Step 2. Start small with daily irritations. Before trying to accept major traumas, practice with traffic jams, delayed flights, minor disappointments. Ask yourself, how is this perfectly designed for my growth? Not as spiritual bypassing, but as genuine inquiry into the hidden curriculum of everyday life. Step 3. Distinguish between acceptance and approval. Loving fate doesn't mean approving of injustice or cruelty. You can work to change conditions while simultaneously accepting that they arose from perfect causation. This paradox is where real power lives. Dull of action without resentment. Step 4. Feel everything fully. Amor Fati isn't emotional suppression. When grief comes, grieve completely. When anger arises, feel it in your body, but add one element: gratitude for the capacity to feel. Say yes to the emotion itself while it moves through you. Step 5. Write your own tragedy. Look at your life as if it were a Greek tragedy you're watching. What's the dramatic arc? Where's the heroism in your suffering? This aesthetic distance helps you appreciate the narrative perfection of your struggles without diminishing their reality. Step 6. Practice the eternal return. Each night, ask yourself, if I had to live this exact day infinite times, would I change how I lived it? This isn't about perfection. It's about alignment with your deepest values. Step 7. Create from your wounds. Whatever has hurt you most, transform it into your greatest offering to the world. Your pain, alchemized through acceptance, becomes medicine for others. This is the ultimate triumph, not healing from wounds but healing through them. You stand now at the same crossroads where Nietzsche stood in those Swiss mountains. You've heard the radical proposition of Amor Fati. You understand intellectually that fighting reality is futile, that suffering and joy are inseparable, that your wounds might be your gifts. But understanding and embodying are different things. You face a choice that's both simple and impossibly difficult. Either you continue the exhausting project of trying to edit reality, maintaining the fiction that things should have been different, waiting for some future moment when you'll finally be happy, or you take the terrifying leap into total acceptance, not passive resignation, but active, creative, passionate embrace of your fate exactly as it is. As Nietzsche discovered during his years of illness and isolation, this choice isn't made once but daily, hourly, moment by moment. Each time life presents you with something difficult, unwanted, or painful, you choose again. Resistance, or amor fati, victimhood, or creative transformation. The small self that demands reality conform to its preferences, or the large self that dances with whatever is. There's no middle ground here. You can't partially accept fate any more than you can be partially pregnant. Either you trust the perfection of causation, including all the horror and beauty it's brought to your doorstep, or you remain at war with existence itself. And that war, as you've probably noticed, is unwinnable. When you integrate this understanding, not just intellectually but cellularly, when it becomes your lived experience rather than your philosophical position, everything changes while nothing changes. You still face difficulties, experience pain, encounter loss, but your relationship to these experiences transforms so radically that they cease to be problems and become facets of your unique diamond. You'll notice it first in small ways.
That anxious mental loop about what could have been, it quiets. The resentment you've carried toward those who hurt you, it transforms into a strange gratitude, not for the hurt itself, but for the strength it revealed in you. The desperate need to control outcomes, it relaxes into curious engagement with whatever emerges. But the deeper changes are almost indescribable. You develop what Nietzsche called a Dionysian affirmation of life, a yes-saying that includes everything, excludes nothing. Colors seem brighter because you're not viewing them through the gray filter of resentment. Relationships deepen because you're no longer trying to use others to complete yourself. Creativity explodes because you're working with reality instead of against it. Most profoundly, you stop experiencing yourself as separate from existence, subjected to its whims. You recognize yourself as existence itself, playing out one unique strand in the infinite web. Your personal story stops being a tale of victimhood and becomes a work of art you're simultaneously creating and appreciating. This isn't enlightenment in the Eastern sense. It's something rougher, more tragic, more beautiful. It's becoming fully human. Remember when I told you about Nietzsche in the streets of Turin, embracing that beaten horse, weeping as his mind finally shattered? That image contains the entire teaching of Amor Fati. Here was a man so committed to saying yes to existence that he physically embraced suffering itself, not his own, but the universal suffering represented by that abused animal. His breakdown wasn't a failure of his philosophy. It was its ultimate expression. He had removed every barrier between himself and raw existence. He felt everything, accepted everything, loved everything to the point where the boundaries of his individual self dissolved. Was this madness or the highest sanity? Perhaps they're the same thing. What I didn't tell you earlier was his final coherent words before the decade of silence. I am every name in history. In that moment, he wasn't Friedrich Nietzsche anymore. He had become what he taught: pure affirmation, pure yes-saying, pure amor fati. The philosopher had become the philosophy. And this is the final secret. Amor fati isn't something you practice, it's something you become. It's not a tool for making life bearable. It's the recognition that life, exactly as it is the only thing worth loving. You are not the same person who started watching this video. Something has shifted, perhaps subtly, in how you hold your own story. That resistance you've been maintaining, you can feel it softening, can't you? That death grip on how things should have been, you're beginning to loosen it. You've joined a lineage that stretches back through Nietzsche to Marcus Aurelius, Heraclitus, and beyond, those rare humans who discovered that the secret to transcending suffering isn't to escape it, but to love it as part of the cosmic artwork that is your life. You're no longer fully enrolled in the collective delusion that happiness means the absence of pain. You've glimpsed something more profound, that greatness requires suffering, that joy and sorrow are lovers, not enemies, and that saying yes to fate is the only authentic response to existence. You've awakened to a possibility most will never see, not because they can't, but because they won't. The question isn't whether you'll use this understanding, you already are. Simply by exposing yourself to these ideas, you've initiated an irreversible process. The seeds are planted. Your psyche will continue working with this material long after this video ends, in dreams, in quiet moments, in crisis. What remains is only this: how deeply will you allow this transformation to go? Will you dabble at the edges of Amor Fati, using it as a clever concept to impress others? Or will you let it remake you from the ground up, accepting the demolition of every victim story, every resentment, every if only that's kept you small? I leave you with Nietzsche's ultimate challenge, the one that haunted him until his final breath. What if you had to live your exact life over and over for eternity? Would you change anything? Your answer to that question reveals everything about who you are and who you're becoming. The universe is waiting for your response.